Okay, welcome everybody. This is part 2 of our Sustainable Beef Systems series through the Farm Advisory Service, looking at the cow of the future. I'm Robert Ramsey, so I am an agricultural consultant for SEC Consulting, working out of the Auckland office, and I'll be hosting tonight. I'm joined tonight by two very accomplished speakers. Our two very accomplished speakers are Sascha Grierson, who is a PhD. She has a PhD and is our agri-economic lead at SEC. So she heads up the Farm Business Survey and several other projects. So she's here to look at where farming's at, where beef farming's at, and maybe some of the changes that have been made, need to be made going forward. It's an interesting presentation from Sascha to come. And then to put some maybe more practical meat on the bones, we've got our first farmer of the series, who is Steven Sandison, who's all the way from Orkney this evening. He's a Nuffield scholar with a big focus on benchmarking, planning, and basically driving profitability into farm businesses, and that's basically where we're at. The conclusions from our farm visit 2 weeks ago and in our webinar last week were pretty clearly, about making money and making, that's our biggest priority as farmers, is to drive profit into our system. So that's what our focus will be in the next wee while, and hopefully we get a couple of good presentations over the next half hour, 40 minutes probably, and then we'll have 20 minutes for a wee kind of panel discussion at the end. I would just at this stage like to hand over to Sascha.
Excellent. Okay. So what am I going to cover? I'm going to talk a little bit about the macroeconomic realities of beef farming, livestock farming. Then I'm going to move on a little bit to what good looks like and how the Farm Business Survey data and the group averages across the specialist beef category and the mixed cattle and sheep category can show us, what's possible. And then I'm going to kind of get into a little bit about goal setting. I've been doing a little bit of that recently with Robert and some other people who may be on the call, and sort of start asking questions: why, how, and what, and then just finish by just thinking a little bit about challenging the thinking around what are the right investments to make in your business. And again, that circles back to the survey data. What's been happening in the beef sector? And I think sometimes agricultural statistics, you can kind of go, well, what's really the point? Surely to God, what's happening on farm now is what's important. And actually what it does is it helps us see the context and the long-term picture in the sector. And here we've got a picture of 10 years, 10 years worth of results from the Scottish Farm Business Survey. FBI there stands for Farm Business Income, and it's basically the return to your business. It's the money that's left over for you to pay yourself, your family, other family members who work in the business, and also to reinvest in your business. So it's quite important, that figure. Compared to all farm types, you can see over the course of the last 10 years that the beef sector hasn't really grown in any way, shape, or form, and it's been bumping along at this level of profitability here on an average basis. So that begs the question: is what is the money that is there to invest in the sector, in those businesses? So it's not all doom and gloom, though, and I think I wanted to just put up this slide just I just kind of collapse the data a wee bit. And if you can follow this is the specialist cattle group. There's 108 farms in the total group, and the performance of this segment is divided into the poorest performing 25%, the average numbers, and the upper 25% of performing farms. And bearing in mind that these farms are selected to be representative of beef farms across the whole of Scotland, and they do incorporate different beef systems, and obviously that's not no one beef farming system is directly comparable with another, but they do give us a broad indication of what's possible. And here there's well over £110,000 that is available to the farm business for to pay the family members that work in it, or the business owners that work in the business, and also to reinvest in the business. And that looks like a much more tolerable sum of money to be able to aim for. And I think in all of this, what we're aiming for is, how do we ask the question, how do we end up in this upper quartile here and not this lower one? And if we're in average, how do we move to upper and increase our chances of this coming back to the business rather than this? And when we look at the mixed cattle and sheep businesses, which are largely sort of more upland and with mixed livestock farming, with no one beef or sheep dominating, we see a similar kind of variance between the top performing businesses and the bottom performing and the lowest quartile. So that just gives a little bit of backdrop of what's possible, what some businesses are achieving. And I should add that these are all the 10-year time series has been adjusted for inflation, and all these businesses are weighted so that no one business that's very large or very small dominates the sample. And that's just a statistical methodology to make every farm be a bit more equal in our sampling. So moving on a little bit, we want to try and understand in that top 25% of farms is, what does good look like? And again, going back to the research, to the data that's available, AHDB back in 2018 did a really interesting deep dive piece of work on the characteristics. Back in 2018, AHDB, the levy body in England, they went to the Farm Business Survey data in England, and they selected a series of case studies of top performing farms because they were interested in trying to do a bit more deep dive intelligence on what were the characteristics of these top performing farms. And they came up with, it's a really interesting piece of work because we sort of have an instinct for it and we talk about it, but there's been very little research done on it. And actually what comes out of it to me is that there are two categories of characteristics of high performing farms. And one set of the characteristics is what I've termed here strategic. It's people. It's very people based. It's very mindset based. It's very kind of the top 4 inches, I think, is what Michael Blanche on, if any of you follow his podcast, he refers to it. People who set goals and budgets, and that they have some kind of vision over the course of the long term, that they have a mindset for change and innovation. So they're open to it. They're not running around doing it endlessly, but they're open to the concept of it and trying to adopt various learnings from different systems and indeed from other people who are working in the sector. There's something here about technical excellence as well that's come out of the report, and people who focus on detail, getting the detail right and managing to sort of raise the technical standards across the business. And then the last sort of what I would call kind of the strategic piece, or the kind of soft skills, is that they have a tendency to keep at it. So they set a fairly long-term vision. They know it takes time, and it does take time for system change, and that they actually keep at it. So there's a sort of strong streak of perseverance in for them. And then the other element of the characteristics of high performing farms is a kind of is a focus on business management. So I've put compare yourself, comparing yourself to others. I didn't want to use the dreaded word benchmarking because everybody goes to sleep as soon as you say that word, but it is true. It's comparing yourself to others in the industry, and there is a mechanism to do that in a fairly light touch way. And then also, what we always say about benchmarking is that your best comparison is against yourself. And so that you build that benchmarking habit. I'm certain there are some of you on the call who already do this, and you know this chapter and verse. Rest assured you're on the right track, and that it's that whole, there's so many business management cliches, you know, what gets measured gets managed, but frankly, they're cliches because they're true. So that comparing yourself. There's also quite an interesting thing here that's come out of the report, that there is no doubt that size matters, and it's not necessarily being the largest in the business. You can have very large businesses that have very poor performance, but there's something about getting the optimum size of land for your system, and it's about being the best. And again, that's probably linked to technical excellence, and it's linked to being able to understand how you spread your costs over your fixed costs in particular over the optimum amount of land to be able to support your system goals. This was an interesting one. The third one here is that debt matters, and that there was quite an interesting thing that came out of the AHDB work was that a little bit of borrowing, a little bit of debt, maybe not so much so that it cripples the business, but a bit of debt actually focuses minds and keeps people focused on repaying that debt and having financial discipline within the business, and also bedding in good financial habits. If you've got a bank manager to answer to, or a loan to repay, then it can focus the mind. And I do remember hearing this a very long time ago when I first started in farming, and first went along to a peer-to-peer advisory group, and it was that was something that was that was something that was shared amongst the group, was that borrowing actually could be a good thing. And then the last one here on the business management side, and it sounds so obvious, but it's something that escapes people, and it can be quite hard to grasp and keep a hold of, is the cost control. And that's across your fixed and variable costs. The fixed cost piece is really interesting because that is something that in livestock systems is traditionally quite high in Scotland and in the UK, in UK livestock farming systems. And you know, the one thing about a fixed cost is once it's in the business, it's remarkably hard to get it out. And that requires sometimes, you know, too many fixed costs can just be a real drag on progress. And so it's something to be very careful of. And I think there's something here about our tax regime perhaps does not support a discipline around managing fixed costs. So I think I'll just leave that there. And then obviously variable costs. And that comes down in the AHDB report. They're very clear that it comes down to better forage management, better grassland management, that can lower your variable costs. And we do see that borne out in the data. So compare yourself, benchmarking, in other words. This is another slice and dice of the data, and it's from the specialist beef. It's just a snapshot from the specialist beef group of farms. And there are 3 types of farms here, and then this is the upper 25% of performing farms. And when you express the fixed and variable costs as a percentage of output, which sits at 100%, the top performing farms for their variable costs come in at just under 30%. And you can see there's, you know, between 6 and 7% above that average. And then again, on the fixed costs, you see that across in the upper 25% of performing farms, the fixed costs are down around 43%. Still, you know, not quite where you'd want them to be, but certainly a whole lot lower than this group here, which are at 53%. And you can see it drops down your percentage of farm business income quite considerably from your output. And so this is like the kind of economic snapshot that you can subject your own farming business to. And we'll put a link in the show notes to the data set that you can do that with. I just had a little note here, and it's something that crops up a little bit in the AHDB report. We've got, you know, sundry income. This includes contracting, and it's clear that the top performing farms are actually doing a little bit extra on the side to boost that output. And I think that's quite important to acknowledge that, but also to to kind of issue a caveat around that, in that you can, if you do too much of this stuff, get a bit distracted from the main event. So goal setting, circling back to the sort of soft skills stuff. I put up this picture from a chap called Simon Sinek. You can go and look him up online, and he's American, and it's all a bit cheesy. And there's nothing farmers hate more than a cheesy American with a corporate strategy, which is just really irritating. However, it does help to focus the mind. There's something here about going back to basics and asking yourself right at the very center, why are we doing what we're doing? And I think I know Steven will probably come on to talk a bit more about this, but it's really essential for any kind of goal setting you're doing in your business. What are you trying to achieve? And that is about asking the question, why? Why am I farming? I know it seems obvious that you're all here because you're farming or allied to farming, but it's actually really important. And it's about, what are you trying to achieve as a family, as a business, and also in your farming system? And then there's something here also about trying to look way off to the future. What do you see in 10 years' time? Because bizarrely enough, it comes around really fast. And before you know it, it is 2034. And actually, have you made the change that you wanted to make? And then who are you having these conversations with? Who are the decision makers in your business? Are you able to communicate effectively with them and get them to buy into your vision? Or actually for you to understand a bit more about theirs? So this is the social sustainability piece. And that's a rather pompous phrase for, have you consulted with do you talk to the people in your business who work with you? Do you all have a common shared vision about where you're going with your business? Because when you're all working together, and again, I know it sounds obvious, when you're all working together, then you can actually achieve great things. It's when you're not that the progress gets stalled. So moving on, then there's the how. How are you going to do it? It's about breaking down the goal into manageable things that you want to focus on, potentially year 1, year 2, year 3. Now, I say all this like it's very easy, but sometimes it's really important just to kind of bite off manageable chunks of the task and get going and not wait for everything to be perfect. That can actually be a drag on progress. And that will help you figure out what it is you want to do. So it's the why, the how, the what, and that can just help get you going. And then there's something here about the last slide I have here is just asking the question, what is the right investment to make? There's a finite pot of resources because you're controlling your costs really carefully. Sector profitability is always a challenge. You're not earning £120,000 yet. You're not in the top 25%. You're still somewhere on that path. And so where do you put your resources? And you can invest in time, so you can invest in yourself to get that knowledge piece. And your family, their knowledge, their understanding, just literally making time for those family conversations that get the whole strategy of the business on the right track, setting your goals appropriately and spending a bit of time doing that. It's so easy in farming to get up every morning and just do the work. And that's quite a safe place to be. Actually, the harder place to be is in that sort of challenging and questioning place. And then with your money resources is investing in value creation. Now, I know that sounds completely obvious, but actually, what does that mean? Well, it means, thinking about things in terms of your output and how you prevent lost output. How do you get the right, as the optimum number of cows in calf? How do you get the optimum number of calves weaned? And all of these things that actually, these are things that are coming, the herd productivity piece is coming from policy signals. We're now being incentivized to have a 410-day calving interval, and incentivized, de-incentivized, whatever way you call it, you're being paid to do a thing to a standard. And also around animal health measures, testing your bull fertility, that kind of thing. And these things, this value creation, is all about lowering the risk of failure in your farming system so that you can optimize your output for the minimum amount of input. And I realize I'm simplifying the whole thing, but sometimes it's very easy to get lost in the technical detail and lose sight of the actual goal, which is the simplification of a system so that you can get the right outputs. And I think I'm going to stop there.
But without any further ado, I'd just like to introduce Steven Sandison, who is a man of many parts, and I know he'll introduce himself more fully, but certainly well-known farmer from Orkney and Nuffield scholar, and hopefully Steven will put some meat on the bones there and add some practical stories to it and see where we go. So over to you, Steven.
Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the invite to come and speak. Yeah, for those who don't know me, I'm Steven Sandison, and I farm here in partnership with my wife Lorraine, and we're three relatively young families still who are all taking a more active role in the farm with each year that passes. I describe myself as a first-generation farmer, but I was born and brought up on a farm, but my older brother, it was on the home farm, so I was very fortunate to get the chance in 2005 to buy this farm here, which we had actually started with 2 3/4 acres, which we registered as Melbourne. And so if Laura goes on to the next picture, that shows so that's the farm we bought in 2005, and the next picture is the most recent picture taken of what is now Melbourne. It's the most recent picture of Melbourne. If you want to move on to the next picture, please. So we were fortunate enough in 2012, for 2012 to 2015, to become Orkney's first and still only monitor farm. And a whole farm review was carried out at the start of that process. And the majority of the report that was written, I didn't have a lot of interest in it, but I was interested in the benchmarking figures, for this was the first time I had seen in black and white the figures for our farm. And that the main thing that stood out for me was that in the years running up to that, we had weaned 89% of the cows that we had exposed to the bull. I thought I'd really been trying in the years before that to try and hit the targets, what was 92%. If you just carry on to the next slide, Laura. I was read lots of industry boom and heard lots of talk, speakers saying that 92% was what we needed to be heading towards, but seemed to struggle to manage it. So I heard then about Nuffield, and quite simply, that was what my Nuffield Scholarship, carry on, Laura, that was what my Nuffield Scholarship became about. And if you stick with 82%. So I did a wee bit of research, and Stuart Ashworth at QMS looked into it to me, and he reckoned that the average for Scotland at that time was 82%, which was a long way short of what we were being told. So that simply was what my Nuffield Scholarship became about. If the next slide, please. And was trying to find the answer to two questions. Was this 92% achievable? But more importantly, what did the best guys, whatever they were, what did they have in common? Now, I'm just gonna run over the sort of the main points in my Nuffield tonight, because obviously my presentation is online and my report is there for anybody that will be interested to read it. But this was after visiting 70 farmers across UK and Ireland. This is, and as well as Canada, Norway, Sweden, but the main focus was the 70 farms in this country in Ireland. This is what I found out was the top 10% of the top 7 were achieving 93% in 9.5 weeks, and the bottom guys were 28. It is worth saying at this stage that these guys were by no means the bottom end of our industry. These guys were all recommended by a third party. I had one farmer that was recommended 3 times as being an excellent farmer, and he sort of was in the average of the farmers that I visited. So if you go on to the next slide, please, Laura. So the 4 main points once I done my Nuffield were management, breed cow type, a block calving, and actually calving at 2 years old. That was the 4 things that I found out. So if we move on then to the next slide. So this, the main thing, I think, the thing that made the biggest difference was the cow type. I not necessarily cow breed, because there's such a variation within some breeds, but so, and this is obviously why what we're looking at tonight is the sort of, well, beef cows. So if you, I think we hear quite a lot about either end of the industry, the suckler industry. I remember a good friend of mine saying he had read a magazine one night, and he said half the magazine was telling him about cutting costs and looking at his net margin and really reducing cow and keeping cheap cows. And he says the other half of the magazine was trying to sell him tractors, machinery, licks, boluses, doses, vaccines. And he says, I just threw the paper down in disgust and thought, well, I'm just going to carry on doing what I've always done. And so I think that the type of cows that we have, and again, I'm going to stay away for speaking about breeds, because one, I don't want to upset folk too much, and also, as I said, it isn't necessarily breed specific, but we hear a lot about the guys who win shows, who top the markets. Auctioneers love that type of cattle because they're obviously really easy to sell, they grade well. And then we also hear about low maintenance, being cheap cows to keep, living off of grass and such like. So if you go into the next slide then, Laura, and I'm, to be honest, I'm not really interested in either of that 2 groups of cows. I see keeping cows a wee bit like how an accountant described accountancy. His client was giving him a hard time for not being able to maybe use the tax reliefs as well as he could. And the accountant said to him, look, he says, accountancy isn't black and white. There's a huge area of grey in which to work, in which the accountant and the client is willing to work in. So I see suckler cows a wee bit the same. So the reason I'm not really interested in the super low cost system is because here in Orkney, the vast majority of the cows are housed for at least half the year. So we can actually grow grass probably cheaper than what we can grow straw. So, and we have plenty of grass. So, and in turn, we have plenty of silage or hay. So to me, I would rather have a cow that's maybe slightly higher performing, that will, yes, she'll get grass silage most of the winter, which some guys would see as a waste. But I would like to think that the other sort of 6 to 8 months of the year, she makes up for it, and I'll say more about that. Also, we have a good premium. There's always been a good premium, I think, in Scotland in general, but certainly in Orkney, because Orkney cattle are suckler bred cattle. Traditionally, there was very little dairy influence, so we tend to get a good premium for our store cattle. Okay, Laura? So that takes me up to where we are at the moment. We have 330 acres, which I manage for the Royal Bank of Scotland. We have 100 cows at the moment, but I'm going to reduce that to 90. It's been floating between 90 and 100 for different reasons for the last few years. And we have 150 ewes. And I've also put in there that we have no diversification. For all my life, I've heard about how important it is to diversify and other income, but I like challenging the status quo, and I have no interest in windmills, holiday cottages, whatever, but I am interested in cows and farming, and that's sort of what I know a little about. So I think that's what I wanted to focus on, and we seem to have kept our head above water yet anyway. So right, go on to the next slide, please. So the cows are roughly, I didn't sit down and count it out, but roughly at the moment about 80% Salers, and about 20% sim. That'll probably swing more, because if it's a Saler cow, they get put to the cemental bull and vice versa. So because we have more Saler cows now, in 5 years' time, all being well, it'll probably swing a wee bit the other way. We calve at 2 years old. The bulls go in on the 1st of May and they come out on the 1st of July. The calves are sold at weaning, and the cows last year, I have no intentions of doing this very regularly, but one of the things I set a target after my Nuffield was reducing my cow size, and I had weighed them back in 2017, and so I weighed them again last year, and they were 690 kilos, and the cows are all housed on cubicles. Okay, all right. So this is just that. This is actually a very old photo. The cows are a lot darker red and have a lot less white on them than what they do then, and especially the calves. But that's just a photo I found to give you an idea of the system that we run for the majority of our cows. Okay, and then the next picture is a building that I put up for the young stock. So as I say, straw bedding in Orkney is a luxury that we keep sort of for the calving and just for the bulls. We try not to have too many cows on straw the rest of the year when it's about £26 a bale, and that's a round bale. Okay, next picture. So I've just put a picture of this cow here. I learned a fairly harsh lesson early on. The very first time I was asked to speak at a farmers' meeting, long before I did my Nuffield, I was asked to speak about the farm. So I went out the day before the meeting was in the evening. I went out and I took a photo of my favourite cow and my favourite in-calf heaver, just to show them the type of cattle I like. And it came to scanning and both of them were empty. So I learned not to ever do that again. So, but I'm safe enough for this cow. This cow went off as a old age. She was about rising 12 years old last year. To me, that as a cemental cow, that's hard to beat. She never had her feet touched, and she had a really good udder right up until the day she went away, and then she's left quite a lot of daughters. So that would be my preferred type of cow. Then that calf would be like 2/3, 3/4 Solaire, and I would rather keep that cow. Okay, so strengths and weaknesses. I think farmers tend to be very passionate about the type of cow they have, and that's fair enough. But every type, every breed, every type of cow, every system has its strengths and weaknesses. And this is a couple of that I would say stand out for me. Strengths, well, I see it as a strength that the cows, I would usually have about 5% twins. It varies from year to year, but I see that as a strength. It's really handy having a few spare calves. And we usually, the calves would be a daily live weight gain of about 1.2, 1.25 kilos. We haven't done it. I don't think we've done it this year because it's not been a very good year, but most years we would manage that. On the weakness side, I would calf 20% of the cows. I don't mind that. I wouldn't want that to be any more, but I would say obviously partly due to the twins. For most of the ones that come with twins would require a bit of assistance. I would probably calf a few heifers every year, come in maybe with a bigger bull calf, and then some of the bigger steer, bigger bull calves when they're born. And I don't mind that if they're going to be for anything 360 to over 400 kilos at 7 to 8 months of age. I don't mind helping them a wee bit to come into this world. Easy calving, easy calving's achievable. If I bought a Highland bull, I would probably have really easy calving, but I think sometimes we want Highlanders the day they're born and Charlies the day they're sold, and that's not achievable. So I'm quite happy with that, but I know other folk wouldn't be. And 10% would need foot trimming. And the cement enthusiasts won't thank me probably for saying this, but it's the truth, that most of my feet trimming issues would have come. I do have Solaire cows that need their feet trimmed, but almost everyone it's come for generations before, and it's usually the cemental debate. Okay, so now I'm just going to move on to me. I used to work out me calving percentage, weaning percentage, that type of thing, but I've gotten lazy. I know that Scott Moves is on Scott EID. It's far easier to take a screenshot of that. So this is just the sort of me figures, the most recent. This shows the calving performance, number of calves that's been born and the calving spread. This year, my calving slipped back quite a bit, and I can't. Well, there was one bull that was a bit issue, but all other cows sort of slipped a bit, and you'll see that in a wee minute. But so that affected. So if you go on to the next slide, please, Laura. So this is the calving interval, and as you see there, I was really pleased that for the last few years we've been sitting just about the 366, 365 days, and but this last year I did have 2 cows because I was short in numbers. I kept 2 cows over that had lost their calves early in the calving, and so they obviously were well. They'll be over 700 days probably. So that will have an effect a little bit. Overall, the calves were a good bit younger. So obviously the calving interval and the 410-day thing has been a fairly hot topic recently. So I thought that might be of some interest. Okay, and the next slide. The next slide is the heifer performance, and that just shows the age in which the heifers are calving. It's not really an awful lot to show there, to be honest. And the last one then is the mortalities, and thankfully I were able to keep that fairly low. And then having twins, I did actually have 11. I didn't have that exciting a scanning last year, but I ended up having 11 sets of twins. So that was they weren't all alive, but even still, it was a great bonus. So the other thing I was going to say, I firmly believe that Scott moves. I think we should be asking Scott EID or whoever responsibility it is. I think there is so much more information that Scott EID is sitting with that I think that it's basically our information that I think we could be using. Now, I can understand why maybe some breed enthusiasts maybe, but I think it would be really interesting to be able to type in what is the average age of such and such a bull, such and such a breed of bull, such and such a breed of cow, because I really do think there will be huge variations in there into how and can I think there's just so much information in there, and I'm led to believe it's all there, but I don't know how we go about getting it become more public. But I'm just throwing the idea out there because I think there's a lot of information that we as an industry could use. So my last slide then is coming to the other end of the year. I didn't go further back because obviously the calves took with cattle with dead weight price improving so much in the last couple of years. The price of the calves, I think my calves averaged about £900 back in £800 or £900 back in 2022. So they've obviously taken quite a chump, but that's what they were in 2023. And as you can see, I don't need to tell anybody that 2024 has been a colder, wetter, more challenging year. And obviously I had the calves. I reckon that as I've written below there, not only were the calves younger, I also then, because of the poorer season, I had to wean them earlier as well. So I reckon they were 15 days younger at weaning. So that obviously had an effect, but even still, the weight of the calves was down, I would say. So on to my final slide, which is just to say thank you very much, and any questions, and that is me.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That was excellent. And it's really, I think the main thing for me there is how honest you have to be. That's to make a job of this, is to dive right in and use true figures, not the figures you want to hear. And I think probably culturally we're getting better at sharing the problems and having open discussions, and even, having a chat with friends in the pub or whatever. But, the people that never lost a lamb at lambing time, but we all know they did. It's having the truth is so important. And I think I totally support what you're saying about Scott moves as well. I think there's a real need. I think what we have is a tremendous resource, and everyone who's been on it tends to agree, and everyone who hasn't been on it should have a go, should go on My Herd Stats and have a look at where you're at, because it can be really quite interesting, and it can highlight something different. We as consultants quite often get a question stemming from that. I was on Scotty ID and I jumped on my Herd Stats and this was a surprise, or this didn't quite fit. And it's amazing how much use that can be. So I would totally agree as well. And nothing's complete. You know, if we can improve it, if we can make differences to it, add more useful stuff in, brilliant. There's obviously data sharing issues and there's all sorts of things, but we've got the start of something really good. And I think perhaps maybe it's an idea for this. If anybody has got an idea of something they'd like to see added in, maybe we should start gathering that type of information and passing it to Scotty ID. So, and also, sorry, this is becoming a sermon from me. I will get to you guys again. Scotty ID, in my experience, are very, very approachable. So they're people, you phone them up with an issue and the issue goes away. Everybody's happy. You know, they're a really good bunch of people. And I think that approach of phoning up or emailing with a suggestion of something that might help is very or pretty likely to happen if enough of us do it and we can show there's a need for it. There's an opportunity there. So yeah, definitely engage with Scotty ID. Sascha, your question from Graham, which you answered, do you want to answer it a wee bit more fully to everybody? So that was about, in terms of the metrics you're looking at, the size of the size of the farms in the survey and the level of profitability.
Yes. Size of the herd in the top, size of the number of cows in the top, mid and bottom were 84 cows on average in the top performing group, 72 in the group as a whole as an average, and 71 in the bottom as an average in the bottom performing group. So that's not that different in herd size. And I suspect there's probably quite a few differences in beef systems. There's a lot of differences in types of beef systems. There'll be people who'll be breeder finishers. There'll be people who'll be store cattle producers, and there'll be people who are finishers only. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and is intended, you know, when you think about where these stats are intended for, they're actually intended for Scottish Government so that it can make effective policy decision making. And we used to do enterprise gross margins on different systems, and that was discontinued, which is a great shame. The other part of Graham's question was that it was 5 labour units. It's actually 2 full-time equivalent labour units and 3 people. So it's 2 full-time equivalent labour units spread across 3 people. So government is interested as well in the number of people who work in farming businesses. They're interested in the number of people who are economically active in agriculture. And so that's why we have a kind of headcount versus full-time equivalents.
How was it? Newmill Show Social, the best show in the world, on Saturday night, and one of the kind of discussion points at the bar was about the trade of cattle and how maybe it's not an ideal time for Scottish Government to see how big how good a trade we're getting. And I think just to reassure everybody, proper government decisions get made based on Farm Business Survey data, not based on the market report they see in the Scottish farmer. And the trend you showed us, Sascha, was pretty clearly showing that we need support, or we fully justify the support given the people that we employ and the track record of profitability as an industry.
That's a really good point. The other thing that has been happening in the data set is that input costs have been rising faster than, on percentage terms, faster than revenue. So, you know, that the data does represent across the board. It does represent the sector across the board. So.
Excellent. A good question here, Stephen. What's the most important stat in My Herd Stats? What's your go-to number?
Calving interval. Calving interval was something I'd actually been doing myself, just sitting doing with sheets of paper and a pen and a calculator, which took a bit of time, like. But so it saved me a few hours in the year. But by fact, to me, I started my working life in the dairy industry, and it's a target to get your cow back in calf, because 305 days lactation was what it was then. I don't know if it's changed. That was what you wanted, to get your cow back in calf, to get her milking again. It's no different for a beef cow.
Mm-hmm. And actually, the difference I can see is it's all she does. So the dairy cow that keeps milking, you can have cows that are 600 days calved and still producing a lot of litres. And actually, in some way, I remember there was one at Crichton that went thousands of days and was still yielding, going really well. She's probably the most profitable cow in the herd. But we don't have the advantage of that. We have one calf to sell, and we're aiming to calve at the same point every year. So it's interesting. I think the calving interval thing is very political, and it's very, whether we agree or disagree with that's where the beef calf scheme is going. The need for a tight calving period and a good calving interval is clear to us all. Would you agree, Sascha? Are you on side with that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's a really interesting question. What is the measure that we should all be looking at? Well, the one that policymakers are using to drive behavior change is the calving interval. It's actually digging into calving intervals. What are the components of the calving interval that are things that will actually be part of your approach on farm, part of your strategic approach? So your calving interval will be dependent on many things. It'll be dependent on your cow health. It'll be dependent on your bull health. It'll be dependent on your calving ease, how quickly your cow gets back into calf. And so I think it's a measure, but it's sort of how it's unpicking that measure that is where the detail is. It's that sort of how do you drill into the detail, and what are the components of a statistic like that what are the contributory components to that calving interval? And they could be a range of different things. And so for me, that's a non-answer, isn't it, Neil McGowan? And is probably more complex than anyone wanted the answer to be. But that's my thinking on that. And actually, I kind of feel that it would be lovely to be able to measure calving ease, but we that's obviously a different thing, and that's not being measured on my herd stats. So yeah, we have to look at the outcome.
I mean, that's one that's very easily measured at home
on farm.
Exactly. That's a record keeping on farm story.
Exactly, and that's a different thing.
Stephen, do you see that of the 20% of cows that you calve, how many of them go back to the bull? I assume it's most, but if you've got a bad calving, where do you draw the line in terms of culling to improve performance or reduce the number of calves?
I actually haven't kept for years. I haven't kept note. The 20% is that's probably at the upper end, to be quite honest. 15's probably closer, but I didn't want to paint a rosier picture than what it actually was. There would be very few of that as bad calvings. Assisting a cow at calving is different for a bit. No, don't get me wrong. I have 1 or 2 bad calvings every year. But if I do have a bad calving, I had a couple this year, heifers that just didn't have enough room. And that's the type of ones that I won't keep. But if it's a cow, as I say, if you've got a calf that's maybe 60 plus kilos, she's probably a big roomy cow. She just needs a bit of help, especially if she's an older cow. I'm having a bit of issue in the past years that I'm thinking I'm getting top of, which is a lack of magnesium at calving, and I would say I saw an improvement. But anything, I don't go but judge by 1 year. Give it 5 before you can say you've helped the problem, let alone solve it. So no, I don't have many bad calvings, but that is assistance.
I think that's the one when we're looking at the goals Sascha's talking about and looking at what we're actually trying to achieve. I'm actually very happy. I love calving cow. I don't, love calving time. I think it's like the issue for me at calving time is it's also IAX time and other work-related stuff has to happen in the spring. So I probably calve more cows based on the need to get to bed or get to work. So I'm quite happy to assist the cow. So sometimes it's the being honest with yourself as to how bad, that intervention? Was it a positive intervention to get, give her a hand, make sure that we've got a live calf on the ground? Obviously, that's what we're trying to achieve. Or is it something that's getting worse year on year? Yeah, and we could discuss that, whether if we were talking to one specific group of breeders versus another, the native versus the continental, there's a lot of things to go at there. There's a good question about how you went about, or so you've reduced your cow size. Somebody did ask the question or make the point that you stated what it was that you'd been looking at cow weight. What was it in 2017 and what is it in 24? 24 at 690 kilos, is that right?
Well, last year actually, it was winning last year. It was yeah. I think from memory there were 702.
Yeah, so you've not been radical with it.
No. And me aim was 680, and to keep have the calves at 340. But no, I'm quite happy. As long as they're under 700. I'm quite happy with that.
Yes, and the question actually is whether you've seen a reduction in weaning weight because you've reduced the cow size, but you've reduced it a little, you've changed other things, and as you say, probably the biggest cause of reduced weaning weight this year is weather for all of us. It's been a challenging year, but it's certainly something to be aware of. We need to have how small do we want them? Everybody's situation is different. There's definitely their suckler cow is fundamentally inefficient. She's a 50% weaning's a really good cow. Relative to other species, she is more inefficient. So if we reduce the size, we can increase the efficiency, but we also have to have something worth selling. So it's a balance, and it's on
paper last year, my most efficient cow, she weaned 67. Yes, it was 67%, which sounds fantastic. But even at her third calving, she couldn't calve unassisted. So she's going for that reason, which seems maybe harsh. But that's why there's always two sides to a story.
Yeah. And there's another point just to clarify about the 4-10-day calving interval, which we and rightly we come back to. The question is that will Scott moves or will My Herd Stats flag up which individual is over 410 days so that you don't claim it? You don't need to worry. So if you've got 100 calves on the ground, 2 or 10 of them or whatever are over 410 days, you claim them anyway. The department will take them off and you'll not be paid for them, but there's no penalty. The calf is eligible to claim, it just won't receive the payment, if that makes sense. So you claim every live calf that ticked all the other boxes and let the department worry about the 410-day calving interval. So hopefully that's nice and clear. What about pelvic scoring heifers and pre-breeding examinations? Stephen, are you valuing that? Is that something you're big into?
No, it's not something I'm done. Simply because I'm not saying that if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't have picked the odd one. I maybe would have, but no. I am working with. We'll have a lot of Solaire genetics. So calving really. So you're working with the Solaire calf is small born. Plus you've got a really roomy cow at calving. So no, it's not something that and I do have a few friends who have tried it, who have stopped it. So I'll leave it there. Yeah.
It's one of those tools. It's there to be used. We don't all use all the tools. It's certainly something I've seen it be a real revolution. In fact, if we go back to where we had our meeting for this project at Easter Howgate, there's been a revolution in terms of, so it's an AI program, synchronized AI program for most of the cattle, and the pelvic scoring of heifers was actually the thing that heifer fertility was a real challenge there, and one of the revolutions was actually getting them pelvic scored because somebody had their hand in them and could assess the rest of them. So it was actually more about palpating uterus, ovaries, do we have all the bits we need to be fertile? And it allows you to pull out those that are never going to breed, which are the really disappointing ones, particularly for the ones who are calving at 2. It's not the end of the world if you've got something that's not in calve at scanning. But if you're calving at 3 or older, all of a sudden we land up as a very young, very, very fit cull cow, which is not necessarily the plan. So there was another. Sascha, have you any thoughts on this stuff just now?
No, I think Stephen's comment about having, looking at cow efficiency as a metric, and I know, that you can have a really efficient cow, but if you have to help her all the time, that's hopeless, So it's about looking at these, however you assess your performance of your animals, and it's kind of putting a kind of context over it as well. It's great to be data driven, but it can lead to its own issues.
And there's a comment come in here to say that calving at 2 is not for everyone. Totally agree. It's horses for courses, and it's what fits individual systems, individual people, what we're trying to achieve. And we've seen the good systems. There's a lot of good systems, a lot of people doing really well calving at 2, but I have done several reviews of businesses where we've moved them later. Resources aren't there or whatever. So it does. I think that's if we're focusing on efficiency, there's going to be more discussions about calving at 2, and I think the other stories, the wider conversation needs to be had. So definitely take that point. Stephen, what's the next challenge? What are you hitting? So you've focused on a lot of targets. What does the next 10 years bring you in terms of the cow? We've reduced numbers a wee bit, but what journey are we on?
Paying for the farm.
Yep, good. You should do that. So keep it, find the profitable system, and as Sascha says, keep working
we've grown pretty fast. We've put up a lot of buildings, so so that is to be the main aim. As far as the cows though, I don't know, to be honest. I wouldn't say I really have one thing but that's what makes farming and livestock interesting and frustrating in equal measure, is that you can maybe have a couple of good years where things work, where your bulls work, but those of us that have stock and farm that due to bad luck, for all variety of reasons, you can have, things can go wrong. So but I can't really say that I have one, because I've said it before, that I'm a bit of a benchmarking geek. I seem to, for some reason, for a boy who absolutely hated school with a passion, for some reason I like record keeping, and I used to keep my own wee herb book. So I've been sort of looking at this stuff maybe right for the start, sort of. So it's just a work in progress, and So
Stephen, you talk about that like that's a joy. Is that a habit that you formed, the record keeping, and do you take reassurance in the data? Do you like the numbers? And then does it help you make good decisions?
Well, I wouldn't really say good decisions, because the decisions, so much, as I already said, farming, it's so much of it's down to the weather and luck. To be honest, there's a lot of blind faith involved with agriculture and livestock keeping. But having Scott moves, it's just fantastic for me, because I can now go and look at that, and that's why I would love. And I would like to echo Robert's point on Scott EID being so helpful. I don't think I ever had a problem with BCMS, but phoning Scott EID is just like phoning your best friend. They are absolutely fantastic.
That's great.
I would. I know they aren't paying me to say that, but
they already paid you to say it.
but
it's one where, certainly my experience, and through work we have phoned with some fairly unique, complicated problems, and they are well received by someone who gets what they're talking about, and I think they're genuinely there to do a really good job. Stephen, see if you're starting out, so obviously Scott moves being the thing that anybody who's not been on, go onto MyHerdStats and have a look. But if we've obviously got statutory records, but we've got nothing, no major, points of reference for a herd. Where do you start? What's the figure you want? You said calving interval, but what's the 2 or 3 real bits that we want to grab hold of in terms of benchmarking to get a start, to get the bug and get into it?
Oh, calving, the weaning percentage is that's the one, whether it's sheep or cattle, and that's why my whole Nuffield was focused on weaning percentage, because you can have as an amazing a scanning as you like, but if you lose the calves before, during, or after calving, then it doesn't mean anything. It's the calves that well, in my case, because I'm selling them straight at weaning, but most folk will be taking them on. It's what you have to sell at the end of the day. It's what matters. So that is definitely the number one.
Yeah, and it comes to that. We said it the other day, but it comes to the fertility, the survival, and the growth. You can have a fertile herd with calves that survive and go on and grow. Those are the 3 points that actually make a difference. And thinking about Sascha's profitability piece, if we're spending money and it doesn't make a difference to fertility, survival, or growth in your herd, you probably have to look at it and see the only other thing it can do in terms of profit is reduce cost. So if it doesn't tick one of those 3 boxes or have a significant reduction in cost, it's possibly a vanity thing.
I would add a 4th point: be a sellable product as well, because you can have very fertile cows, you could have a wean a lot, but if there are a lot of if they aren't what the market's wanting, then if you're hundreds of pounds per beast down, that's a lot of money. So no, we could debate all night then about, but we want them all to be U pluses and whatever, but then we know that that's probably going to come at a cost. But no, I think they need to be what the market wants and what the market's willing can pay for as well. Because I say in our part of the world especially, it is the live ring, or store cattle, whether they're sold privately or through the ring, but that is by far the most common way of doing it, because we're a good bit away for the grain, the straw, and the slaughterhouses.
Yeah, and that's where your system, you do the bit that you're good at and punt them on to closer to the grain, which is it's a good job. I'm conscious we could talk all night, and there's questions coming in right, left, and centre.
Well, I'm in no hurry.
Well, what we will do maybe is to share a bit. There's a questions to come from last week to get squared up as well, so we'll need to do a bit of work and get these questions back to those that sent them, because there is quite a lot. And really, I think to highlight, Stephen, excellent understanding of where we need to get to. It's been really good to speak to you. I would highlight your Nuffield and presentation. I think we'll share them because they are interesting. And although you said before it's getting distant, it was a while ago, but I think every day that goes by it gets more and more relevant. Actually, this is where the industry needs to get to. So it's very interesting. We'll certainly share it for those who want to read it. There's also a podcast, and this is a shameless plug, Sascha, for you and me and Colin Mason. So there's a Stock Talk episode which we'll share, which was basically on this stuff, and it dives into. Colin brings quite a lot of the veterinary stuff in, and it's actually quite a nice wee piece in the end. So we'll share that with the group as well, and then we'll reconvene. I think it's the 10th of December. We'll send you out more details on that. Where the next, so that what we're trying to do here is we've got the problem, the solution, which we've talked about tonight. So what we need to do, and then the next one is how we get there. So that's actually really practical examples, of which Stephen was a toss-up whether he was in this one or the next one. So the next one is pretty farmer focused in terms of what we're actually doing out there, good news stories, good ideas, sharing ideas. So that's the next one. And then the final one will be after Christmas, which will be a panel session. Your feedback's really important. So again, you'll get a feedback form out. If you could tell us how it went for you, particularly the bad bits. If you didn't, something you didn't like or something you didn't agree with, it's always good to hear the constructive feedback so we can actually make changes going forward. And a big thank you to, first is Farm Advisory Service for making this happen. Second, to Sascha, who is ably explained where we're at in terms of economics, and particularly to Steven, who I thought was excellent this evening in terms of delivery, presentation delivery, and also adding meat to the bones with waste questions and answers. So excellent. A big thank you to everybody, and also thank you to those that have joined us tonight. I've really enjoyed it. Hope you have too, and I'll see you again in a few weeks' time.